It's the moment that every reader dreads, the death of a main character. But how do you do it? Should you do it? And how do you do it the right way? So in this video, we're going to talk about some tips on how to successfully axe your main character without killing your reader engagement. What's up, guys? Michael Laron here with Author Level Up, helping you write world-class stories better and faster. And I create these videos because I believe that each of you has Stephen King level talent and you just need help unlocking it. So if you're new here, consider subscribing and click that little bell, ding, 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 to get notifications every time I have a new writing video. And this video is part of my How to Write Engaging Main Character series, where I delve into how to write engaging main characters that your readers will never forget. And in this video, I'm talking about some tips on how to successfully kill off your main character without killing that reader engagement. Now, it goes without saying that every writer is different, every story is different, and every story makes its own demands of the writer. But these tips will at least help you think about this in a different way. When you kill off your characters right, readers will respect you for it. But when you do it wrong, you get the bad reviews and you get the hate mail. So, we want to avoid that. The first tip I want to offer you is to consider whether you're writing a standalone or a series. If you're writing a standalone book, then you definitely have some more options in killing off your character, right? Because there's not going to be a continuation of it. But if you're writing a series, you got to think long and hard about how you're going to kill off your main character, because your main character is the center point of that series. And if they're gone, then in most cases, you don't have a series anymore. Second tip we're going to spend some time on, and that is to consider the point of view. Now, the point of view is incredibly important, and it can guide a lot of the decisions that you make in terms of the fundamentals. The first POV that I want to talk about is first person. So we have a first person POV that is with just one character, like a lot of urban fantasy is today, or you have first person that is with multiple characters where the story is told in the first person. Classic example of this is the Animorphs series. Now, with the first person where you have just one character that's telling a story throughout the entire book or throughout the entire series, this is next to impossible to kill off that character. The reason for that is because it feels like a breach of trust, right? Because you're telling the story through the eyes of this character, and then the character dies, and plus you're in that character's head. They're telling you the story. I suppose you could have the character die in real time as the reader's reading it, but it's something that's just not done, or if it is done, it's done pretty sparingly. Now, if I were to do this, and it's a big if because this is an advanced technique, but if I were to do this, I would tell the series or tell the book through the perspective of the main character, and then I would have a final chapter where the hero signs off with dignity, or there's some level of ambiguity on maybe what happens next, and then I would address the death either in an epilogue or the next chapter told in the third person through the perspective of one of the other supporting characters. Now, again, that's some advanced stuff. It's pretty advanced, and you run the risk of your readers coming to your house with pitchforks. So, but if I were to do it, that's how I would do it, because you preserve the narrative first off. You let the hero sign off with some level of dignity, and then you also make sure that you address it and you tie up loose ends with that last bit of narrative. Now, if you're writing a story with in the first person with multiple point of view characters, then you have a little bit more flexibility, right? Because if you're telling a story with three characters and then one of them dies, the other two just pick up the slack. But if I were going to do this, I would definitely make sure that I've established that character, and I probably wouldn't kill them off until at least the 75% mark in the book or in the series, because you got to remember, when you're writing fiction, you're doing a lot of groundwork. You're doing a lot of establishing your character, and it just seems counterintuitive to me to build up a character and only to kill them off at the 25% mark. So the 75% mark is not a hard and fast rule, but for me, that's the point where it feels like, okay, readers start expecting people to die. Now, in the third person, we actually have the same options. So we have the third person with one viewpoint character, and then we have a third person with multiple viewpoint characters. And your options are the same whether this is a third person limited or third person omniscient. So if you've got a third person with one viewpoint character, you kind of have some restrictions. I mean, the story is told through that viewpoint character, so generally speaking, you're going to want that character to probably die at the end of the story. Now, there are exceptions to that. There definitely are exceptions, and there's, like I said, with fiction, there's no hard and fast rule to anything. But generally speaking, if you're going to have your main character die and it's in the third person, and you've only got one character that the story's being told through, they're probably going to want to die at the end. Now, the great thing about this option is that the readers can watch the character die, right? Because the narrator is not the character, so they can actually watch them die. They can see the emotional reactions. Now, you still have to establish the character. You still have to build them up. But it's a pretty cool thing to do, and readers do like that. Now, with the third person with multiple characters, this is the easiest, and it's definitely the best option that you have if you do want to start killing some main characters, because one character dies, the rest of them just kind of pick up where the character died. And the cool thing is that you can have them pick up the pieces of the emotional baggage and all the story stuff that this character might leave behind. It's definitely a really interesting way to do things. But again, you've got to do it right with smart narrative and good details, and making sure that you establish the character and make them die in a way that feels believable and that feels real. And I know someone's going to ask this in the comments. Yes, you can kill off a character in the second person as well. So with the second person, the character is actually the reader, right? So it could be fun, right? I mean, you have the reader reading about how they're dying and how they're experiencing a grisly death. I mean, just pick up any choose your own adventure, and you get a master class in how you can do this in a book. But the downside to the second person is that it's more of a novelty POV. It's not really meant for long form content. And I say this as somebody who unsuccessfully tried to reinvent choose your own adventures. Don't believe me? Check a video for a video comments or video description for a link to one of my first books, Magic Souls, which is a choose your own adventure for adults. Now, the third tip I want to give you is to think about how the death of the main character will affect the other characters in the story, right? So I talk about how the other characters have to pick up the slack. Well, when someone close to you dies, you're going to grieve, right? It's just a very natural human emotion. Now, I read somewhere recently that this is bad science and it's no longer good science. But if you think about the 7 stages of grief, right, that's a great way to think about a character grieving the death of another character. Now, I know some of you social scientists watching are going to roast that a little bit, but it does work, and it is an acceptable thing to think about in terms of fiction, right? Because you can think about your other characters, and you can think about putting each of them in a different stage of grief, and that creates conflict. And another thing you want to think about is, are the characters going to unite and rally around the death of the main character, or is the death of the main character going to essentially be the death of the party? Now, if you're just wanting more tips on how to write your characters more effectively, or how exactly you put them in these 7 stages of grief, then check my character tips video that is also part of this How to Write Engaging Main Character series. The fourth tip I want to offer you is, are the heroes that are left behind, are they going to rally around and redeem the main character that has died? Or is this going to be a breaking moment for them, right? So typically, I think what a lot of people think about is, okay, the character died, so the other characters are going to avenge them, right? And that's a perfectly valid way to do it. But there's also another option, which is the death of that character rips that team of heroes apart and it scatters them to the winds. Then what happens? So in all of the books that I've written almost 50 books. I've only killed a main character 3 times. So I'll share some examples of kind of how I did this and how this tip applies, but I won't spoil any of my stories, of course. But in the first book, I had a story or series that was told in the third person limited, and it was told through the perspective of 3 different characters, I think. And one character in particular had a illness that he was hiding from the rest of the team because he was kind of embarrassed by it and didn't want it to get in the way of stopping the villain. And the character continues to hide this disease throughout the story. It gets worse and worse, and it becomes harder for him to hide it. And at the end of the story, he ends up sacrificing himself to save the rest of the team. And the team comes around and they rally around and they avenge his death because, well, the villain made him die. So that's an example of how your heroes can rally around, but he didn't die until near the end of the story. In the second example, I also had a series where I told the narrative through the perspective of many different characters in the third person. And there was one character in particular that had the secret or had the ability to kill the villain of the story. And it was pretty much known and assumed by the reader and in the story universe that this character had everything that he needed to kill the villain. And it was pretty much assumed that this character couldn't die. And then around the 75% mark of the series, I think in book 3, I ended up killing off this particular character. I didn't really expect it to happen, but I ended up doing it. And so what ended up happening was the team that had rallied around to fight this villain, losing this particular character, it completely destroyed this team. And they ended up scattering, and they were never the same. And so they ended up having to fight their own battles and fight against this villain who gathered even more and more and more power. And the villain prevailed in the end. That is an example of how the death of a main character can unravel a team and do irreparable damage to where the team may never recover. Now, it depends on what you're writing, right? I probably wouldn't do that with a romance, but it definitely is an option, and it is an advanced technique that you can explore if you wanted to. Guys, don't forget that my book, How to Write Your First Novel, explores all the technical aspects that you need in order to write your first novel. I talk about the fundamentals of writing fiction, talk about the fundamentals of writing character, and if you like the tips in this video, you're going to be right at home with this book. So it's available everywhere books are sold in ebook, audio, and paperback, so be sure to get your copy today. But I really want to hear from you guys. What's your favorite character tip? And have you ever killed off your main characters? Let me know in the video comments and let's learn from each other, because I think this is an essential skill that you'll need at some point in your career. So if this is your first time watching, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll talk to you in the next video.
Perfect.